Pask came along, Gordon Pask, and saw everything as a conversation and extrapolated cybernetic principles and did studies with human beings and built machines and so on and so forth, and proposes a way of looking at everything, as you say, his theory is a theory of everything, as a conversation.
Welcome to the Conversation Factory. I'm your host, Daniel Stillman. Each episode, I'll talk to an amazing conversation designer to try and distill insights we can all bring into our work and lives. Human conversation is a material that can be shaped by design, and shifting conversations in everyday meetings, in organizations, and yourself can create real change. And I hope to help you do it better and more authentically. I'd love to have you stay part of the conversation. Head over to theconversationfactory.com to sign up for my newsletter and never miss an episode. That's theconversationfactory.com. I'd also love for you to be part of the show. If there's a challenging transformation you're working through, head over to theconversationfactory.com, click coaching, and sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching that we might use on the show. Head over to theconversationfactory.com, hit coaching, and let me know what conversations you need help redesigning. Enjoy the episode. Okay. Cybernetics. I was describing the ideas behind this episode to a friend, and he was like, Cybernetics is about steering? And yes, it is. Check out the show notes for some essential links on cybernetics and an essential diagram to help follow along with this episode, which is pretty visual. The idea is this: you have goals and I have goals. If we're in conversation, the way we find a shared goal is through probing, experimentation, alignment on means, revision of goals, mistakes, and recursion. The recursive process of seeing a goal, aiming for it, seeing the error or gap, and then moving to close the gap, that's cybernetics. And the principles of cybernetics really are a way to think about everything, or anything that has purpose, goals, or intention. So orgs that need to shift business models, teams that need to tighten timelines, or getting your friends to pick a restaurant for next week. So everything that really matters. If you need people to agree on things before they can happen, you need cybernetics. And if you're good at getting people to agree, you're a solid cyberneticist, or in my language, an ace conversation designer. In my journey through conversation design during this year of the podcast, Dr. Paul Pangaro has been a rich guide and mentor, one of the people who sees the diverse ways that conversations shape the world, how systems have purposes and goals. And in true conversational style, I've certainly been altered by his ideas. Paul is a professor and chair of the Interaction Design MFA at Detroit's College of Creative Arts. He has a Bachelor's of Science from MIT, you might have heard of it, where he wound up getting hired by Nicholas Negroponte into a program that you also might have heard of, something that wound up being the media lab at MIT. He then went on to get a PhD in cybernetics in the UK and came into contact with Gordon Pask, a cybernetics and conversation design visionary whose work Paul is still evolving and processing. The application of cybernetics to conversation has been a mind blower for me. It's helped me think about how to structure longer projects, to design teams, to form powerful framing questions. That ability to frame a question in an invitational or motivating way to make it seem solvable without giving the solution, it's an amazing superpower to be able to kickstart an amazing conversation. But asking that question designs the conversation, sets the stage for what comes next. And so I'm always cautious in my conversation designs to control for writing solo before group conversation flows, because whoever speaks first sets the stage for whatever comes next. They all speak in response to what's been spoken already. Paul and I talk about 3 big conversation design concepts that are worth paying attention to: how to think about group composition, cadence, and complexity, the conversation with yourself in the past, i.e., time travel, and the relationship between goals and play. So I'm going to outline all three of these high level so you can watch out for them in the show. First, the group conversation. Do we have the right people in the room? Do we have enough diversity to answer the question at hand? Can we design a cadence of interaction that allows us to shift the question and the composition of the team in a responsive way? In cybernetics, a system that wants to influence another system has to be at least as complex as the system it seeks to control. Is your team more complicated than the problem you're solving? Good. But who gets to frame the group and the cadence? How do we invite people into the group conversation? Who has the power to give permission? 2, the conversation between myself now and myself in the past through writing. I'm a fan of pen and ink because as we write, we watch the ink flow and see our thoughts as they were moments ago as we move into the future. The act of sketching or writing allows us to witness our thoughts as they were and converse with them as we are. Crazy, right? Finally, 3, how established shared goals allow us to play together, even become one. If we're dancing, a form helps us know our roles and goals. Are we dancing the tango or a waltz? Knowing this makes it possible to better respond to stimulus from our partners. I think that's why Agile, design thinking, lean are so popular. With Parkinson's law of ever-expanding work, there seem to be no rules anymore. We've broken partner dancing, starting with the twist. And now we never know what to do on the dance floor. Some of us crave for a throwback time, the swing era, the mystery of the tango, where we knew what to do, where there was more clarity. Agile, Scrum, design thinking, they are a dance form that makes it clear what the roles and goals are. It's a game we can play if we know the rules and have a shared vocabulary. When we share goals, the line between us blurs or dissolves. We live in amity. Or you can draw a box around us and call us a system with a shared purpose. To dance. So this is the last episode of season 1. It's been a year, 22 episodes, hours and hours of conversations in real time. And many, many times that in listening and editing and writing about them. I've learned a ton and I've had a blast. And thank you for being on the journey with me. I am taking the holidays off and am working on season 2. Stay tuned and enjoy the show. Paul Pangaro, thank you so much for making your time again for me. I appreciate you coming on the Conversation Factory. So I honestly want to talk to you about dancing. I want to talk to you about goals and control and cooperative games because I was reading up on or watching up on some of your old videos about Gordon Pask, and you mentioned dancing, and I think it's such an amazing analogy to try and understand this idea of goals and control.
Great. It's a great topic. It's one of my favorites.
You talk about the man sort of you push against your dance partner, and that's control. But because there's a shared goal,
yes,
there's a power relationship there, but there's also a response to the request. And that's a conversation.
Yes, exactly. I think one place to start is the cue you've given me, which is, what do we mean by control? And is it always horribly bad and to be completely avoided? And as you're suggesting, the answer is no. It's actually quite important that sometimes it be the case. And the dancing example is great. So you're dancing with a partner and you begin to move. And certainly initially, when you start out, you probably end up shoving them a little bit. And I choose the word shoving intentionally, because in most situations that would be quite awkward and very inappropriate and probably subject to a violent response, perhaps appropriately, certainly a violent verbal response. But because in the context of that shoving, there is already an agreement at some higher level, let's say, Pask would say, a higher level than action. The agreement is to coordinate and to dance and to cooperatively move together, usually under certain rules. Now we can come back to relaxing those rules, but in dance, the rule tends to be, it has to be somewhat rhythmic. And often you agree to a form. Is it a tango or a cha-cha or a waltz or a free form, something else? So in that moment when you shove your partner, you're treating them like an it, because you're treating them like an object. You're pushing them. But that takes place at a level of organization or structure or thinking, if you will, inside your partner. It's as if the perception of being shoved goes up. That would be the dimension that Pask would move it into. It goes up and is compared to what the current goal is. Well, if the current goal is to dance and this shove is consistent with that dance, then your partner's fine with it. And in fact, your partner's response in a truly fully cooperative dance, not all dances, shoves back. And you have the same reaction on your side. Oh no, I've just been shoved, but it's okay because we have a shared goal. This is absolutely a conversation because at some higher level than action, higher level than the shoving, there's a degree of agreement. And within that degree of agreement, these actions are consistent. Now, the fun part is the actions of each are probably not completely predictable. And so novelty occurs, and your partner is surprised at the particular direction change or the particular tempo change or whatever it may be. And as a result, this novelty adds to the experience. It's more positive in the experience because it brings something unexpected and novel, and also probably invites an equivalent novel response in return, again, if it's a fully complementary dance situation. And all of these things are true in conversation. I'm talking now, you can't talk, shut up, I'm talking, I'm in control. But it's okay because usually in fairness, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, and then you're in control, and I shouldn't overly dominate you when you're responding to me or telling me I'm wrong or whatever it may be, and back and forth. Now, this evolution takes place in a third dimension, so it's back and forth between the participants, but in some third dimension of time, things are changing. Well, what's changing in the case of dance? Well, you're learning to feel your partner better. You're understanding their preferences, their capabilities.
Wait, Paul, what was the third dimension was time. What was the other two dimensions?
The other two dimensions are just the up and down, back and forth of the relationship between an action and a goal. So in the Paskian universe, up and down is the it referenced things. So I shove you. This goes across and down. Be easier in a podcast if you could show a diagram or two. And you take that feeling of being shoved and you, again, in the Paskian dimensions, pop up to the goal. You say it's consistent with the goal. And then you shove back, which is going diagonally down. So you're going from your level of goal across the divide between you and your partner. And you're going from above at the level of goal to below level of means. You can think of this as a 2x2 matrix.
Yeah. So up and down is goals and means, and left and right is I and thou.
Correct. And that's what Pask calls the exchanges that cross the vertical divide. They're I, you, or I, thou in the Martin Buber sense. And he was very consistent with all of that and referenced it from time to time, certainly a lot in conversations and occasionally in references in his papers. So those are the two dimensions back and forth. But as you were saying, this moves in time and takes a third dimension, and the evolution in that dimension in dancing might be getting better at dancing. In conversation, it might be the evolution of what we're thinking together.
Yes.
You might know better what I'm thinking. And even more importantly, you might suggest a better way for me to think. And you would advance my thinking and we would advance each other's thinking. And novelty would occur because you and I can have a conversation that I can't have with myself or you can't have with yourself.
Well, it is hard to dance with yourself, regardless of what Billy Idol might say.
That's true. It is possible, but it's limited.
I want to clarify this because I'm drawing a diagram for myself. So goals is sort of up and means are down. And you're saying that because me and my partner have shared goals, there's an acceptance of means, even if the means are maybe surprising or unexpected.
Yes. There's an allowance for means. Now, sometimes this is all verbal. So we might say, let's have dinner. And you say, great, let's go to the Korean place across the street. And that's your proposal for means. And I say, no, I'm really sorry. I can't do peanuts. I can't do spicy food. So we then negotiate what that might mean for us. And maybe we can agree on, I don't know, Persian food. Doesn't matter.
And because our goal is not just have dinner together, but for me to not kill you. That's like the higher goal up above that goal, right? We want to have dinner together. Dinner should be nourishing to both of us. Therefore, obviously Thai food is out.
Yes. And in fact, there may be other higher level goals, which is to have a wonderful conversation, to have a convivial time, to plan a project, to, waste time waiting for an airplane. There are countless reasons why we might want to get together. But there is this hierarchy of means and goals up, up, up. And at some level, Maturana would say, what is that highest level agreement? I'm translating it into Paskian terms. It's that we want to live together. And the means of living together would be countless ways. Certainly it would involve not being aggressive and not killing each other, trying to kill each other. And there would be various other things, all the way down to normative conventions of society, like shaking hands and saying thank you, and all of the other little things of courtesy and etiquette that allow us to interact smoothly moment to moment. But these are all means in service of higher level goals.
So I'm beginning to see how conversation as a way of life and cybernetics as a sort of a theory of everything starts to make sense from your perspective, that if you're always seeing you and whoever or whatever you're interacting with in that framework of goals and means and this recursive loop, I mean, everything kind of does fall into that, or everything can fall into that picture.
I believe so. So cybernetics, of course, began in the 40s with this conversation across many, many disciplines, sciences as well as soft sciences and humanities and philosophy and so on. And it was the recognition that systems can be looked at as having purpose. And if they have purpose, then how do they act in order to achieve their purpose? So they want to get something done, they act, they see that they're not getting it done, they see a difference between what they wanted and what they have. That's called an error. In a technical sense, error ain't bad. You need error to know what the hell to do next. And so you act to correct the error, and then hopefully you converge on your goal, on what you wanted to do. This is the fundamental of cybernetics. Jumping ahead, Pask came along, Gordon Pask, and saw everything as a conversation and extrapolated cybernetic principles and did studies with human beings and built machines and so on and so forth, and proposes a way of looking at everything, as you say. His theory is a theory of everything, as a conversation. And some are richer than others. Some are more capable of getting somewhere than others. And other components of cybernetics, like the notion of variety in a system, comes into play in conversation as very important. So variety is the notion of how powerful is the system? What's its capacity? What are its capabilities? And Ross Ashby has a very rigorous measure of variety, but basically it's how powerful is the system, how much can it do, and under what circumstances.
You've moved on to my I wasn't going to get to that until halfway through, but let's talk about that. Well, so I want to take a step back because when we were talking about systems having a purpose and we're talking about rules and looping, I did want to talk a little bit about where this oversects with games, because we're talking it seems like we're talking about a cooperative game. And that's where this idea of this Paskian idea of amity comes in, where because we want to play this game together, we're willing to deal with errors. We're willing to accept some rules. Like, does cybernetics actually have it must have a Venn diagram with this idea of a cooperative game?
Sure, there are lots of overlaps there. The more you could define about what you mean by game, the more we could do that overlap, but fundamentally it's there. I think the notion of rules comes in as the constraints of the environment that you're acting in. So right now, if I would try to make myself cooler, I would open the window and that might help. If it doesn't help enough, then I can put on lighter clothing. I could go get a fan if I have one in the closet, but from there I'm stuck. That's it. These are the only options I have. Okay, fine. I could drink a cold glass of water or sit on an ice cube. So the variety I have available to me are within the rules of what the physical environment allows.
Yeah.
And I suppose the same thing is true in a game. The game, of course, needs to be programmed, assuming it's a digital game. And the variety allowed in that programming is a way of saying how much leeway a player has or doesn't have to manipulate the possibilities. I guess the question arises, is that a conversation, a player playing against a machine in a game? And the answer is always, it depends. So in a conversation with you, what's important in that conversation is I or you or both of us evolve over time. Because if we don't change, it ain't really a conversation. It's a coordinated action according to rules that are fixed.
So I want to put a really fine point on that. Like in your definition, a conversation is one in which both parties are altered.
One or the other, or both.
Yes.
So you might just repeat what know.
One or the other or both, because it can be an unequal transformation.
Yes.
Yes. I would say like an asymmetrical power dynamic, right?
Yes. Oh, there are many asymmetries. It's never perfect. You may repeat over and over again the same thing, and if I don't learn it, then I'm not changing.
So is it enough that if I get the high score in the game and my name goes on the board, I've altered, the game is altered due to my input, and then even at the most superficial level?
In a sense, it's altered, and in a sense, it knows your name and it knows your score.
Yeah.
So it's been altered in that sense. But here's a question, and I think I know the answer. Will it play you differently next?
Yeah.
Will it play someone else differently as a consequence of playing with you? Does it learn?
Yeah. No, I mean, most games, no.
Right. So that's not a conversation.
Yeah.
Similarly, Siri and a lot of conversational interfaces, so-called conversational interfaces, are not really conversations. They're a few exchanges to coordinate action. Play NPR. What time is it? These are trivial. These are not conversations. And it tends not even to remember 2 minutes later what I just asked it. So it loses context.
Which is very frustrating.
It's ridiculous, and they know it, and it may change over time. That's something, since I saw you last, or maybe around the time we were first talking, I gave a talk about that twice, actually, trying to argue that conversation is more than just a user interface.
Yeah, I mean, especially in this definition where both of us are changed. If this is treating the digital agent as a being, that agent has to be changed as a part of the process. If they're the same, then they're not altered.
Yes, and a little bit of it, in a technical sense, would get us into how is it changed. And again, as I was trying to say, if it behaves differently next time, then that's really learning. And the sophistication of that, the knowledge that it retains, to the degree that it's nuanced or not, and to the degree that it changes what goes on. I mean, you and I have had a couple of conversations that changes the way we have our next exchange.
So I think it'd be really interesting to talk about Ashby and requisite variety, the idea that a control mechanism has to have more or the same number of states as the thing it's going to control. And
yes.
This is weird because I'm not sure I understand this very well, because there's the examples I think you used in the past is like, if I am in a room and that room has a thermostat, a person controls the thermostat and the thermostat controls the room. I have power over the room. It's a conversation I'm controlling. There's no choice. In that sense, I presume, have more states than the thermostat, and the thermostat has more states than the room. And so there's power in that relationship, right? I have power over the thermostat has power over the room.
So there are a couple of things there. The thermostat has power over the room to some degree. In other words, the heating system is designed such that if it's, well, actually we should be talking about air conditioning.
Well, no, you're right, because the systems have a purpose and there's rules. It's very frustrating when the system is not heating. We call on someone, we get them to fix it because it's not working.
That's right. We say it's broken. But the design of that thermostatic system and the heating or cooling associated with it is intended to work within a certain range. So here I am in Detroit, it's going to get up to 80 or 90 degrees pretty soon. So this air conditioning in my space should have enough states, enough variety, enough complexity to bring the room back to 75 Fahrenheit, even when it goes up to 90 outside. But then the question is, well, what if it goes up to 110 outside? Well, it doesn't work then. It won't bring it down to 75. It can't control it to achieve the goal of 75 Fahrenheit when it's 110 or hotter outside. Does that mean it's a bad design? No. It means that the designer decided that we're not going to design it for 110 degrees because that would be twice as expensive, be 3 times bigger, it would eat up more energy, and so on. So a side comment here is variety is expensive. The more variety a system has, the more it costs. So therefore, we limit every design and we act in ways within certain limits because we have an expectation of what those limits are. And most of the time, we're fine. The classic example of this that I love to cite is there was a massive, massive snowstorm a few years ago all over England. And everyone complained because there weren't any snowplows. And so they said, why is that? You're a terrible government. We don't have any snowplows. And then the question came, well, how often would we need snowplows everywhere in the entire continent in order to satisfy the need of a horrible snowstorm across the entire, I shouldn't have said continent, the island of England?
Yeah.
And the answer is once in 100 years. So the amount of money it would take to have the variety to deal with a snowstorm of that magnitude isn't worth the money because you'd only use it once every 100 years and you'd be amortizing that expense over 100 years. It's just a waste. So the idea is that a designer chooses the amount of variety in a system based on an expectation of the conditions under which that system has to operate, knowing that it will fail if those conditions are exceeded. Now, there's a word for what we call this design idea, which is that we claim as designers that the system has enough variety, or the technical term is requisite or required variety, to achieve our goals within the boundaries that we as designers define. So it's the designer's responsibility to decide this. It's not given ahead of time. It's not obvious because it's not just about whether you want to achieve the goal or not. It's, I want to achieve the goal at what cost against what likelihood of justifying that cost. Now, in a lot of places like airplane design or seatbelts in cars or a variety of other things, variety, that snuck in, we want to design for a wide range of variety. Elevators, I think, are 7 or 10 times. So if you want to put 1,000 pounds into an elevator, you design it for 10,000 pounds, so it won't fail even if you have 10,000 pounds. This is a safety factor.
Yes.
This is another word for variety that you're building in, because you don't want to be wrong about that one. But if I'm wrong about my AC, then most of the time I'm fine, and once a year I'm too hot.
Right, and that's a choice, a cost we're willing to endure.
Right.
And what was Ashby's interest? What was he talking about specifically when he was thinking about requisite variety? Was he part of conversation theory, or was he thinking about other things?
No, I think he was thinking about other things. First of all, he was a psychiatrist, and he wanted to describe the kinds of things we're talking about in very, very rigorous terms. And he wrote a book to do this called Introduction to Cybernetics, in which he puts forth this idea. He later wrote a book called Design for a Brain, which goes further and elaborates some of the ideas in Introduction to Cybernetics. But Design for a Brain was really what his goal was. And he didn't mean, a neural net meat machine in somebody's head. He meant the system that would maintain regulation in highly complex environments under varying conditions. And there are many ideas that he has in his books, but variety is perhaps the most valuable. And it may be the most important of all of cybernetics, because as you stated earlier, there's this law which says that if I'm building a system to achieve my goal, that system has to have at least as much variety as the environment will present in order for the system to manipulate the environment to achieve my goal. So again, does this HVAC system in my living room have the variety sufficient to achieve my goal, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, under nearly all the conditions that I can normally imagine? Yes or no?
So I want to shift that, because the other context in which you talk about required variety is in designing the design conversation. When we talk about, do we
Yes.
have the right people in
Yes.
the room to tackle the challenge? And I think the example in one of your videos you talked about, where it's like, well, we want to solve world hunger. Do we have enough knowledge in the room? It's a very complicated problem.
Yes.
And obviously people are very complicated, but do we have enough complicated people in the room in order to be able to begin to tackle this problem? That's a really hard thing to know.
So there are a couple of ideas in there, and it's fun to unpick them, I think. One is you're making the appropriate bridge between variety in a mechanical system, like an HVAC, to variety in a conversation. And this is what a lot of my work is about, as you know. So if you and I are trying to design something in this conversation, we might quickly decide that there's something we don't know enough about, and we need to increase the variety. So we invite someone else into the conversation next time. And this goes on and on and on. And it's, as you know, what I call a cadence of conversation.
Yeah.
Instead of creating a team. And this is important in a lot of ways. It's more efficient in some ways. And it keeps us vigilant about making sure that we have enough knowledge in the room to do what we're trying to do, which we can never know perfectly. We have to act and begin to build and try things out in order to confirm or deny whether or not we do have the right variety, but we can go for it. There's a second notion, though, that's important to say, which is world hunger and other problems are in a class called wicked, as coined by a guy named Horst Rittel, R-I-T-T-E-L. Now, wicked problems are bandied about a lot these days, and the original meaning is somewhat lost. Wicked now tends to mean, whoa, that's a wicked problem, as if it means very, very complex. But Rittel and one of his colleagues, Weber, have in a paper many, many attributes of wicked problems, of which world hunger or homelessness are great examples. And let me give you a demonstration of that, if I may. I do this a lot in courses. So let's solve the problem of homelessness. Great. Okay, we agree on that's the goal. So what's the problem? What do we do? And someone will say, well, we need more homes. Great. Okay, so the problem is we don't have enough homes, so we're going to build a bunch of public housing. Are we done? And then people in the room say, well, no, we're obviously not done. Maybe the homeless person doesn't have a job. Oh, right. Okay, fine. So the problem is jobs. So let's get jobs. Good. Okay, we got a bunch of jobs. Are we done? Maybe the homeless person doesn't have the skills. So it's about education. So the point of a wicked problem is it's not even clear what the hell to do.
Yes.
Because within this high level goal of curing, that's really ambitious, or taming the wicked problem of homelessness, we have to work on a means to that and a means to that, on a sub-goal and a sub-goal, or a means. And in order to act, we have to agree on what our action should be, which is a way of saying, what are we trying to do? Are we? And becomes whack-a-mole, right? If we say that it's about not enough homes, then we say, no, it's about jobs, then it's about money, then it's about education, then it's about mental health. It's, what do we do? So these problems are inherently wicked, because it's even difficult, sometimes impossible, for us all to agree on a formulation that we feel like we can make progress on and act upon. And that's a wicked problem.
It's almost like it's not even that the solution is NP complete. Like the definition is also MP complete.
That's right. We don't even know how to formulate the problem in a way that gives us action. So again, the terminology is we don't solve a wicked problem, but we tame it, because other attributes of wicked problems. You're never done. You're never going to snuff out homelessness 100%. The actions required to do it are different in the case of homelessness than in the case of other things. So if you solve one wicked problem, you can't generalize what you learned to a different wicked problem. There's no stopping rule. Hey, we've been doing it a long time. Are we finished? No, we're never finished. So when do we stop trying to over-design and take action? Or when do we, et cetera? And it goes on and on. There are 8 or 10, depending on how you count them, different attributes to wicked problem. So this comes down, one more thought, beyond the cybernetics of understanding a simple feedback loop to the cybernetics of framing and language and how we even look at the world, and the subjectivity with which we look at the world and the values that we bring to that way of looking. And now we're far away from science and we're not even, close to engineering. And we're struggling with just trying to have a conversation to agree on what's important.
Hey, this is Daniel. We're at about the halfway point, so this is a great time for you to get up, stretch your legs, get some popcorn, fill up your soda. If you're in the car, stay focused. If you have your hands free, this is also a great moment to head over to the conversationfactory.com to sign up for the newsletter. I send out more detailed write-ups, insights, and tools from these conversations, and I'd love to share them with you. So head over to the conversationfactory.com and stay in the loop. You talked about in the past that the conversation about the right problem is an important, and that's what we're talking about. Like, are we solving the right problem?
Yes.
And if you say to someone, go solve this problem, describe that as a closed conversation, because you are treating you are treating a person like a thermostat.
Yes.
Right? You're saying, you go fix that thing. And that person is an agent. They're not a thing. They're not an it.
That's right. You're shoving them.
Yeah, and so this comes to the question of power and invitation in conversations, because the first step in the cybernetic loop of conversation is an invitation, right? There's an invitation. You put out your hand for someone to dance and they bring their hand back, or you say hi and somebody says hello. And then there we are, we're in a conversation. And if you say, go solve this problem, you're treating someone as a less than equal partner. And there's this idea of, even in designing the design conversation, who gets to choose who shows up? Who gets to choose what the cadence is? That's also power. There's power in designing the design conversation. I don't really know if there's even a question there. There's this idea of invitation, power, and control that seems very befuddling to me right now.
Well, you're absolutely right. There's this notion from many years ago that requires a level of cooperation that you'll see in a minute. And the story goes that if there's a bunch of soldiers on a battleship, and the battleship is trying to decide whether to land on the beach. And so the admiral says, all right, you scouting party, you go in this little tiny boat and you go to the beach and you tell me whether it's safe to land. So the scouting party goes in a little craft and goes to the beach, and the guy on the beach radios back to the admiral and says, hey, it's safe. So the admiral says, okay, fine, let's land. Now the question arises, who made that decision? And what cybernetics says is the admiral didn't make the decision. The information made the decision.
That's very interesting.
Now, of course, there's agency to the information. And the terminology for this that was coined at the time was redundancy of potential command. So command, the power, the decision-making moment, is potentially in many different places, and it depends on the information. So in the best of all possible worlds, if 10 people are in a room, or 2, the best ideas emerge as the guide. Now, if I'm in there playing games and I want to be the one who makes the decision, or I want to dominate, or I've decided ahead of time, then it ain't working that way. And sometimes the person with the boss title can manipulate that conversation and say, I'm doing this because I want to. Real leadership is making a space of possibility where the best idea will emerge, and often a consensus emerges. Not always, that's an ideal case. But sufficient consensus could emerge to lead, to make the decision, to be the best apparent choice.
I agree, because it's very hard to create real action without the consent of all the parties in the system.
Yes.
Top-down push marketing doesn't work. I was just listening to another episode that I'm editing right now, where he talks about push marketing doesn't work in this world anymore. You can't call someone up and make them buy something. You have to, there's an invitation where people,
Yes.
you say, hey, there's this thing, and people want to play in that cooperative
Yes.
game. And I think you're absolutely right. Leadership that demands loyalty, leadership that demands certain types of behavior is very, has a very short, well, literally a short leash, right? And a short half-life.
It works well in situations where there's no uncertainty. So in a manufacturing situation, everybody has to follow the rules because it's the most efficient way of making something and everybody knows what to do. Now, if something unexpected happens, that system as it is can't make a decision, and it becomes a different system when somebody says, oh, well, we got a problem on, line 5, the gasket blew, and now let's fix it. There was a bunch of work done by this guy in the 50s with human experiments. This guy was named Alex Bavelas, Bavelas. And he put people in situations where there was no ambiguity or there was ambiguity. He created an experimental situation in which this was the case. And in the situations where there was ambiguity, they were not only unable to decide what to do, but they also started accusing each other in emotional terms of being incompetent and stupid and so on and so forth. So the social contract of interaction broke down when the ambiguity was too great. That's an invitation of saying, well, if you have a company and it doesn't possess the variety it needs to do what it's trying to do in the world, then people will start carping on each other and blaming each other rather than focusing on trying to solve the problem, simply because the situation is too ambiguous for them to manage. And so they become emotional creatures instead of rational. Anyway, this particular set of experiments is fascinating that talks about that.
It's very interesting because this idea that when ambiguity is very high, it's almost like, we all have a certain amount of bandwidth. We can listen to a certain amount of people at one time. We can do a certain number of things at one time. And when there's too many channels open, and I think there's other studies on multitasking that have shown this, if you're checking your phone and driving, you're you're at a high risk for being able to not be able to respond appropriately in an emergency situation. And I think the same thing goes true, certainly in companies that I've been parts of, where there's high ambiguity and there's many, many states of choice. There's no control mechanism that has enough requisite variety to encompass all of those things.
Right. It doesn't have the variety it needs. It doesn't have requisite variety to regulate in order to achieve its goals. Exactly.
Which is why I think in some instances we want to bring in an expert. It seems easy it's like, this guy knows more than we do. He has more states of control than we do. And we give him some power, and they have outside knowledge. They should be able to tell us what to do.
Right. That's the presumption. Yes. But of course, even though it increases the variety, it doesn't necessarily give you the right answer for action. For example, we could bring in an expert on, poverty, building houses, mental health, job creation, and training. We could bring all of those people into the room to try to solve the problem of homelessness. But we wouldn't necessarily, just by having those people in the room, be able to do that.
No.
So you can't do anything without the variety. Well, you can. It's a random guess. You might, roll the dice and come up with the right idea unexpectedly, but that's not likely and highly unlikely and inefficient at best. Right? Just rolling the dice, trying it out. But conversely, just having the right people in the room is not the answer either. That's why I try to talk about these different conversations.
Yeah. So you mentioned this a couple of times, and this is interesting. And I think this is like the designerly way of knowing, which is that, well, we can never know perfectly, so we have to act and then learn.
Yeah.
And that is also maybe a cybernetic approach as well. I'm curious to talk about some of the things that Pask made and how he learned from what he made, because you talk about this idea of this conversation between the person and the object we learn from making. And this is very interesting because the object itself doesn't have consciousness, but it does have information. And so I'm curious about this dialectic, this cybernetic relationship we have as designers. We make something and then we learn from that object. and then something happens.
Yeah, so this is great. So the question is, in that situation, where is the conversation taking place?
Mm.
And it's tempting to say that it's between the human and the object. I'm working on this paper now and doing research and pulling arguments together about this. Ranulph Glanville speaks, as others before him speak, about the relationship that a designer has to a pencil and paper. And so I write something on a piece of paper, and that feels like consciously we might want to say that I am having a conversation with the paper or with the object that I'm writing. But what conversation theory would say, and what Glanville says, is that I'm having a conversation with myself because as I draw it, I'm one participant. And as I look at it an instant later or 5 minutes later or a day later, I'm a different participant and I see differently as a consequence.
That's very interesting. So it's the conversation over time. You're having a conversation with your past self.
Yes. And it might be second to second, or it might be longer. There's a wonderful researcher who passed away recently. He was at MIT for many years, Edith Ackermann, and she had worked with Piaget and with Papert, and was at the Media Lab for some years. And there's a lot of discussion in learning theory and play and childhood education, this relationship between the mind and the hand. So again, this would be between thinking and acting. And she says, well, that's fine, but it leaves out the eye, the seeing of this thing that's going on. And I would say the creation of a conversation is a consequence of that seeing between different points of view about what's going on. And we have conversations with ourselves all the time, even though we don't know it. The one I like to use is, well, I'm hungry. Great, Paul. Why don't you go out for pizza? Yeah, well, the last time you had pizza, you got indigestion. Yeah, but I really liked it. Yeah, but then you didn't sleep. This is between me and myself, and it's different points of view. And we do a lot of decision making this way. It isn't always conscious. A lot of it is, and some of it just happens, and then we rationalize it afterwards.
Yeah, self-talk. There was actually just an article in the Times about how there's some recent psychological studies that showed that when people repeated their task to themselves, it helped them. In other instances, it didn't. If you're looking for a banana and they show you lots of pictures, you can find banana faster if you're like, okay, banana, 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 banana. But if you don't know what a banana is, saying banana over and over again is not going to help you find anything.
Right.
The inner conversation is it's very interesting. So what you're saying is that the conversation between person and object is actually, and the learning from making is actually a conversation I'm having with my own thoughts, but with a time lag.
Yes.
Because I'm making something, my eye and my hand and my mind are having a different dialogue than they would have without those artifacts.
Yes, exactly. Heinz von Förster has a wonderful expression for this, which is, if you desire to see, learn how to act, which as often Heinz's statements do, it throws the common sense on its head, right? You'd think you're supposed to think about something and then act upon it, or you're supposed to design something and then make it. But this is trying to say that you see, you understand, you apprehend, you make coherences, you learn, you frame, and you create language. You do all of that as a consequence of action. If you couldn't act, you couldn't be able to do any of those things. Certainly, human beings and biological systems are cybernetic in that sense. They act in order to know.
It's really funny. In Sanskrit, when you look up a word in the Sanskrit English dictionary, my parents were into Sanskrit. They're weird people.
That's great.
When you look up a Sanskrit word, you get the definition, but then there's a seed of that word called the Dhatu. And there's a book called the Dhatusapata where you find a list of actions you can learn about that word in. You're like, the actual definition of this word is found in the action.
I love that.
Yeah. So it's like the act of knowing is actually found. The word is killing. You actually, by killing ignorance, is how you actually learn about truth, right? That's the definition. There's this you go back and back, the goal and the goal behind the goal and the goal behind the goal. That's what this little seed word gives you. It's very interesting, this idea of
That's
desiring
brilliant.
to see, learn to act. And there's this, I think this is being able to state a problem as a way that it can be solved, and then making something towards that solution is it takes a certain,
Yes.
I don't know what I would call that word. There's a risk, there's a tolerance for uncertainty, there's a willingness to try a certain kind of I don't know, stupidity I call it, because a lot of people, you say something can't be done, and then somebody goes ahead and gives it a crack, and maybe it's good enough.
Yes, exactly.
So we covered a lot of ground, and I'm very glad we've touched on a lot of these things. We just have a few minutes left. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about with regards to these questions of really conversation as a way of life and power and control and invitation that we haven't talked about that would be interesting to touch on?
Well, let me say a couple of things. Conversation is always a whole lot messier than how we talk about it. And it's riddled with ambiguity and partial agreements and misunderstandings. And anytime we say, well, we agree on the goal, what we really are saying is we think we agree on the goal sufficiently to act in coordination. But I can never really know what you really think about something. I can only know enough that as we coordinate about it, whether we're talking about it or acting on it, that I don't come across a contradiction that makes me stop and say, wait a minute, I don't understand. So our degree of agreement is always partial, but it only can be partial, and it only has to be sufficient to allow us to act together in ways that we want to be collaborative.
Sufficient to move the conversation forward.
That's right. And it's only until I say something and you go, wait a minute, that sounds really wrong compared to what you said a minute ago. Or you agree with your partner to dance the tango, and all of a sudden you're, body slamming them. So that's a contradiction. And you say, wait a minute, I didn't agree to that. I suppose it happens a lot in elections too. Another thing that I wouldn't want to leave behind, and Pask would always want to talk about as well, is in this back and forth of conversation that crosses the vertical separation between participants, and that also has a motion up and down in its crossing over between goals and means, that you can realize that this vertical distinction between you and me in this conversation is about the fact that I'm a human being over here and you're a human being over there. But at some point, if we agree very well on our goals, very well, that is, to move forward and to act together, and we begin to act together as one, that's the metaphor I'm trying to get to, then this vertical divide disappears. And really what we have is goals at the top and means under them. And the interactions that are taking place are us behaving as if there's no vertical divide, that the difference between one side and the other is collapsed, and we achieve unity. So we become one. And if you think about the literalness of that, it's, I think, quite striking. And what Pask meant by amity, and later used the word love, and Maturana was never shy about using the word love, what each of these guys mean by this is this removal of the artificial barrier, this verticality that separates you and me, us in a social sense. The barrier, this vertical separation between you and me and everyone else, goes away because we're coordinating our actions with agreed upon goals to a degree that it's as if we're a single system acting. So we're acting in unison. We are unified. We become one. And that can be called, in a social sense, love. It can also be called making love. And these are all compatible ways of thinking about some end roles or end aspects of conversation.
So in a sense, it's not that the line between A and B goes away. It's that we can put a container around A and B and say they're a system, and that system is acting in concert.
Yes. So the physical difference can't go away, right? So in that sense, it doesn't go away. But remember, a system is what we say it is. A system is how we look at something. And you're suggesting putting a boundary around it to create a knowledge of the unity. And that's exactly right. Another way to say it is the distinction between me having one idea and you having another idea disappears, because now we have the same idea, the sufficiently same idea to have the same goal.
Yeah.
And we've agreed to dance the same dance sufficiently such that we're the same thing that's dancing, not separate things that are going to cleave and have a separation, but rather it's purely a matter of framing what's the important model of what's going on. Is it a box around things that are separated, or is it the separation leaving? These are just two different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And I suppose as Shakespeare would say, a consummation devoutly to be wished. Right? Exactly. That connection with another system. Certainly in all of the work that I do with group dynamics, that's what we're trying to do, is erase that distinction, getting people to have shared ownership over an idea, shared ownership of goals and means. That is a tough thing to do.
I agree. And of course you can go too far, because then you get groupthink. And then you get no one coming up with a new idea, because of course we've agreed on what we're doing, and why would we question that? And we know how we're going to do it, so we're just going to go do it. And that's a case where changes in the environment have to be paid attention to. And you want to make sure that things haven't changed to the degree that you better change what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, whatever the right level is. Because otherwise you're being consistent with a situation that's no longer the case. Situations change, but you're acting in the same way.
Yeah. It's amazing how much overlap in the way you talk about some of these things is with some of the people from the agile world that I've talked with. There's so much shared views around what, when you talk about shifting conditions, but static plans, very, very similar perspectives.
Yes. Yeah, the dangers are the same in both situations.
One insight that I'm leaving with, one of the questions I've been having is around this idea of an invitation.
Yes.
The invitation to a conversation implies, in order for it to be a real invitation, there's a recognition of the other as equal.
Very much.
And in a way, it's funny, it draws that line between A and B. You say, like, I'm here and you're there.
Right.
And what you say is, like, I'd like you to please come over and suspend your disbelief, to play this cooperative game with me, to try something out, to take on a certain amount of rules in a certain place and time, but to do it as an equal. That there's this opt-in. There's whoever must play cannot play, right? I can't demand that you play this game with me. I can ask that you play it with me. I can invite you in, and I think that treating you as a thermostat, right, is always, it's surprisingly easy to slip into treating someone as a pawn.
Yes, of course. Anything else we want to finish on? I mean, I can spend another couple of minutes, unless you think you have what you need.
I think I have what I need for now. It's sufficient to move on to the next conversation.
Bingo.
Bingo. Paul, thanks for your time. I really, really appreciate talking with you, as always.
It's a pleasure. Your questions are great. Your interest is wonderful.
Thank you. And we're going to leave it right there. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. Thanks for your fine attention, and I'll see you next time.